The airline industry is embroiled in another controversy. This time, Spirit Airlines is facing backlash. It appears thousands of airline customers there are being impacted by a dispute between Spirit and its pilots. Passengers at Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport broke out in brawls after 9 flights were canceled. Sheriff's deputies were forced to step in to de-escalate the conflict. CBS News travel editor Peter Greenberg joins me now to discuss the latest. Okay, Peter, can you break this down? What is the dispute here between the pilots and Spirit Airlines?
Well, it's been going on for a while there. It's obviously a labor dispute about pay and other incentives. The pilots were essentially staging whatever they were going to call it, a slowdown. But when you have a slowdown at an airport like Fort Lauderdale, which is Spirit Airlines' hub, you shut it down. And in this case, you shut down 9 flights and they didn't have a plan B. The problem in the service industry isn't the delivery of the service, it's how you recover, and needless to say, Spirit did not recover well.
They issued a statement here. This is from Spirit. It says that they're shocked and saddened by what happened in Florida, and they've filed a suit in federal court. What does this mean for their business?
It doesn't really mean a lot for the business because we've gone from 8 major airlines in this country competing for 88% of the market share to 4 airlines that essentially own it. That doesn't even include Spirit. That's American, United, Delta, and Southwest. And so people fly the airlines that they have to fly. There's not a lot of brand loyalty anymore. It's based on rate. A year ago, American Airlines found out that 87% of their passengers had only flown the airline once, and it was only based on rate. So there is no more brand loyalty. So the real problem is you're going to have to suffer. At least that's the perception.
You know, we have these rules now. If you're on the tarmac for a certain amount of time, you get certain privileges, certain rights. Will this change? I mean, how do passengers fight back when they find themselves increasingly in these disputes?
Passengers are finding out very quickly in the wake of the original United Airlines incident, they don't have very many rights at all. There are passenger service commitments that are followed by the airlines, but they're not part of a brand. They're not part of a contract, so therefore you can't enforce it. The problem right now is, will Congress do anything? And every year Congress says they are going to do something. Every year there are at least 3 or 4 pieces of legislation that are introduced, but never seem to leave committee. The airline lobby is very strong about that. I've seen 4 or 5 separate bills of rights that have just died, right? The answer may just be in rulemaking by the U.S. Department of Transportation. You mentioned the tarmac delay rule.
Yeah.
That's basically an example of that, where you couldn't get any legislative help, so the Department of Transportation made the rule that if you put people on a plane and push them back from the gate, and they're not returned to the gate within 3 hours of the departure time, guess what? The airline is liable for fines of up to $27,500 per passenger.
Wow.
Guess how many delays there have been because of that? Not many. Wow. So right now, I think the look is to see, will the Department of Transportation enforce, or certainly make, rules about denied boarding, what the rules are, what the consequences are, and then what passengers' rights are under those circumstances.
And there's something called interline agreements. How does that affect passengers?
Well,
what is it?
One of the reasons why you saw that brawl in Fort Lauderdale is because if you're flying on an airline that doesn't have an interline agreement, meaning it has no agreement with any other airline to take their passengers in the wake of a flight irregularity, not counting weather, but a delayed flight, a canceled flight. If you're on American, United, or Delta, and your American flight cancels, they have the ability to put you on a United flight or a Delta flight. Spirit Airlines has no interline agreements. So if you're not flying Spirit, I mean, if you're not flying anybody, as long as you're on that ticket. That ticket has no value except the Spirit. All those people who are stuck at the airport are there because the only airline they can fly in this situation is Spirit, and when they leave is based on when they get a plane.
And Peter, we've seen recently a slew of airline issues with passengers. What do you think is happening here? Is there a larger problem that's at play?
Well, you may have noticed that in the wake of the United flight incident, the American, the Delta, each airline, when they make their apology, says more or less the same thing. We're shocked, as Spirit said, but they also say something else. This does not reflect our core values and culture. And there are some who would argue it might confirm their core value and culture because management at these airlines have been driven so much by generating revenue and profits that they're telling their frontline people, their gate agents, their counter agents, their res agents, their flight attendants, the people who have public contact, what they're no longer allowed to do. So they no longer felt they had permission to think in a commonsensical way. They no longer felt they had permission to be reasonable. And therefore, you had that problem in Chicago where they only went up to $850 because they didn't think they had permission to go higher, when in fact, of course they could.
Yeah.
And so you're taking away decision-making capability on common sense levels from the very people who need to make it, the people who have common public contact. So when the airline says, we want to retrain our staff, they might want to retrain their management.
Interesting to hear you say that. I was surprised. I took a flight to California this weekend, and Delta offered me a sandwich in economy. I was kind of surprised.
Well, there's a breaking story.
There's a free food on the airline.
Well, no, some of that is coming back. United Airlines has snacks now in coach. I mean, some of those things that we used to take for granted now are looking at as a major perk.
Yeah.
Remember, airline food can be considered an oxymoron, so you may not want to eat the sandwich, but the point is at least they're trying in that regard.
Yeah, A for effort, I would have to
Yes.
say there. Peter Greenberg, thank you for joining us.
You got it.